I need some traction. You need some traction.
Intro. Hi, everybody. My name is Lloyed Lobo. I'm the co-founder of Boast.AI. In 2014, Boast.AI and Launch Academy, which is one of the top startup incubators, started Traction Community. It started as a conference, and now it's become a community of 60,000 founders across the US and Canada. We do a big annual conference. We've done it in San Francisco. We've done it we've been doing it in Vancouver. We do weekly webinars, and we do founder dinners every other month, and so on. And we've had to unfortunately postpone our annual conference coming up in August due to COVID and so on. So now we're taking all our content, all our speakers, and we're rolling out much larger webinars. Generally, we're seeing 500 to 1,000 plus attendees per webinar, and it's been a great success. We take all of this content and we post it on top of onto our YouTube channel. Today's webinar is presented by Boast.AI Launch Academy in partnership with Lazaridis Institute, incubator for companies that are scaling up, that are going from 2 to 3 million to 15, 20 million in revenue, and they've been, 50 million in revenue, and they've been a great partner. Today's topic is especially exciting and interesting to me because I want to share a little bit of my journey. As I said, I'm the co-founder of Boast.AI. I'm based in San Francisco. I run product at the company, and I've been a part of product and growth for a number of tech startups, venture-backed in the Bay Area, that have raised lots of money. And a couple of them have failed in the last, in my last outings. And one of the biggest barriers I found was recruiting in the Bay Area was very challenging, right? So you get this average engineer cost that is extremely high, but maybe you're averaging $200,000 to $250,000 per engineer per year. And building a product team in San Francisco is very difficult because you got expensive engineers, you got stock options, you got recruiter fees, and you need a recruiter when they have so many options. And then if you don't raise another round of funding, let's say in 2 years, they're going to look for other options, right? Generally, what we would find is that, hey, what is the opportunity cost of my equity here? You've not raised, my stock options have not gone up in valuation. I got to look for another job. So it was very, very difficult to build and scale a team here. And now at Boast, what we've done is effectively we have 30 engineers in Canada, great software engineers. Our average retention, employee retention is over 5 years. And just in general, Canada, people care about a set of different things than some of the other places perhaps. And what's been exciting to me is we're able to double our growth year over year. We're able to build an awesome team and scale significantly faster than we would have if we built a team in the Bay Area. And that has been a big driver to our success. People are supportive. The visas are easier. So we've brought in workers from Italy, from France, and so on, and we're able to get visas for them in no time. You can get work permits essentially in 3 to 4 weeks. You can get permanent residency for them and their spouses within a year. So the visa process has been very quick. There's great access to engineering talent. And to tie on to that, there's government programs which fund you anywhere from 60 to 80% of your dev costs in Canada. If you want to hire university students, there are programs that let you go and hire master's, PhD level students on smaller projects for 3 to 4 months. So then you can work with them and understand them before you bring them on full time. So just a generally very, very supportive ecosystem. And Canada has been one of the biggest drivers for our growth. And like I said, we've been doubling growth year over year. As a product leader, building a team in Canada has been very fruitful for me because, when you look at remote, you're looking at, hey, should I do India? Should I do Europe? And so on. The time difference makes it easy. There's no language barrier. Similar tools, philosophies, development mindsets. And so that's the added benefit. So with all that savings, I'm going to pass it on to Aaron Baer, my good buddy. So on today's webinar, I'm excited to have Aaron, Baer, and Ilya from VanHack. So Aaron has a law firm, Aird Berlis, and Aird helps a lot of our Bay Area customers and friends set up in Canada, and they tell you all the pitfalls and how to set up and have the right remote structure so your team is ready to fly. And then Ilya is going to help you do everything from hiring the right people, devs, finding the best talent, whether they're in Canada, whether they're in international, bringing them, setting the right processes in place, and having the right remote structure so you can fly and scale right away. So without further ado, Aaron, please take it away.
Perfect. All right, I'm going to share my screen now. Well, thanks so much for the introduction. I really appreciate it. And I just really want to highlight, the tech system, the tech infrastructure in Canada, and especially in Toronto, is incredible. I was lucky a couple of years ago. I did a little secondment to a legal tech company based in Toronto. They're part of DMZ. So I got to spend several months there. And they were a company that, we had brought into our firm to help us provide more efficient services. It was a really great chance to sort of go behind the scenes to see the ecosystem. And in that case, at the DMZ at Ryerson, they had the world's first legal tech incubator. So 20 companies doing really interesting things, but just a small example of that ecosystem that exists in Canada. And as Lloyd mentioned, I mean, there are so many good reasons to look to Canadian talent, from Shred, which we'll talk about. So it's tax incentives, to the US Canadian exchange rate, to just a really incredible pool of talent. There's a really great graph that shows on one axis, it shows, the talent pool, so how good is the talent? And you've got, San Fran over here, you've got Seattle, Boston, all your big US hubs. Toronto's right there, maybe a little bit below, San Fran, because a lot of good people are being poached straight from Canada to go to San Fran. And then on the other axis, you've got the cost. And you've got, your San Fran's, all your big US cities. Toronto is way down. So you've got this incredible value because the talent is incredible, and same with the rest of Canada. The talent is incredible, but the cost is a lot lower. And as a result, what that's meant is that for our firm, so I'm a partner at Aird Berlis, so we're a full service Canadian firm. It means that we do a lot of work these days with tech companies, and we do a lot of work these days as well with tech companies coming from the US, from Europe, from Latin America, from all across the board, setting up in Canada. In some cases, they're setting up purely from an R&D standpoint. So they're solely hiring devs in Canada, and that's all they're doing here. In other cases, they're doing some sales, they're doing a few other things, and they also have developers. But in any event, we've seen just a massive explosion in the last few years of companies coming to Canada, and obviously COVID's had a change of pace where the need for an office here may be out the window in some cases. But I think in a lot of cases, people are realizing there's a lot of talent here. The thing to think about is, great, we've got someone we want to hire. How do we structure this in a way legally that makes sense? Because we've seen this from a couple of clients that come to us from other firms or haven't consulted a lawyer. And it often is much more expensive and much more time consuming to clean up a mess. If we structure things properly from the get-go, we can do it in a time-sensitive way, in a cost-effective way. We can make life pretty easy. But when we don't do that up front, we've seen some situations that are less than ideal. And one of the biggest drivers of all of this is tax. So Lloyd will talk a bit later about Shred, so the tax credits, and that's a huge driver for people coming to Canada. The flip side is we got to make sure we structure this properly. And the good news is we've done this for dozens and dozens of companies in the last year. As a firm, we've done this for hundreds and hundreds of companies in the last year. So it's not new to us, and we've got people that can help at all steps of the way. From an incorporation standpoint, we seem to get asked the same questions over and over again. And I think sometimes there's just misconceptions out there. So I figure let's start off by answering a few of these basic ones. You do not need a resident Canadian director. So you do not, if you're a US company or a European company, you do not need a Canadian to come to Canada. What you do need, though, if you're going to incorporate in some provinces in Canada, is you do need a resident Canadian director. That is not a Canadian citizen that's been living in the US for the last 10 years, because they're a citizen, not a resident. But you do need a resident Canadian director in a lot of provinces. But just like in the US, you've got a lot of companies that incorporate in Delaware, even though they're based in California, they got nothing to do with Delaware. The same concept applies here. What we do for 99% of our US or European companies is we incorporate them in British Columbia, where Ilya is based currently. And the reason we do it there has nothing to do with Ilya, although maybe that's a good selling point in the future. The reason we do that is British Columbia says, you know what, we're happy to have companies incorporate here. We don't care if they have a resident Canadian. We will gladly take their incorporation fees. And there is no difference from a tax perspective. If you're setting up a Canadian company and you're going to hire employees here and they're going to do R&D, it doesn't matter where those, where we incorporate the company. What matters is where those employees are based. So typically what we do, we set up shop in British Columbia. What that means is we do some paperwork behind the scenes to make your process easier and not to bore you. We send you a checklist that says, hey, here's the information we need. Get this back to us. Let us know if you have any questions. We coordinate behind the scenes. We get that set up. Let's pretend you're going to have the employees actually based in Toronto, but we've incorporated you in British Columbia. We just send a piece of paper, or well, digitally at least, to the government in Ontario that says, hey, we incorporated in British Columbia. We're actually doing business in Ontario. And the government says, no problem. So we work around that. What type of corporation to incorporate? Sometimes people say, oh, I'm not sure I want to incorporate. Do I incorporate? Do I just open a business here? Can we have an LLC? And there are a bunch of differences in the US and Canada that it's important to understand. But really, there's really two options. Option one, incorporate a company. Option two, do not incorporate a company. If you don't incorporate a company, you can't have Shred. And then Lloyd can't get paid. But more importantly, Shred is good. It's free money coming back from the government. And there's a lot of tax reasons and other reasons in general why you're going to want to incorporate. So then if we're going to incorporate, the question is, well, what type of Canadian company do we incorporate? And the good news is there's really only two options in Canada. So in the US, you've got boring stuff like C Corps, S Corps, LLCs. Those don't exist here. You've got a plain Jane, boring, vanilla Canadian company. And you've got what's called a ULC, an unlimited liability company. A ULC and a normal Canadian company are identical from a Canadian tax perspective. We could not care less. There's a difference, though, in the US in how they're treated. So one of the things we often do is have a conversation with the company or their US tax advisors to say, hey, this is a US question. We can explain this to you, but you let us know which one you want. Most companies go with the traditional one in part because it gives them limited liability. So if you're creating a Canadian company, you got a box. Canadian operations happen in that box. It earns money. It pays staff. If it wants to send money to the US company, maybe it pays a royalty, maybe it pays a dividend, but it's a separate legal entity. What we do after we help you incorporate is there's a little bit of behind the scenes stuff we've got to do, because suddenly you have a company in Canada and a company in the US, and well, for all intents and purposes, from a business standpoint, you see them as one entity, as you should. But for all intents and purposes, they really are two separate companies. And if they're two separate companies, it means we got to make sure we're complying with the laws. So for example, there's a concept called transfer pricing, which is an accounting and tax concept, which is a little boring, but it works something like this. Imagine you've got a company in Canada and you've got a company in the US. So the company in Canada is going to be taxed on its profits. So imagine that the Canadian company is operating and it's going to have real sales to the public. It's not just doing R&D. And the Canadian company is using the brand of your US company, and it's carrying on business. It's using the software. It's reselling that software. If the Canadian company pays 1 cent to the US company for the name and the software, well, the Canadian company is going to have, so the US company is not going to have much revenue from that. So it's not going to pay a lot of tax. And the Canadian company's going to have a very small expense. It's paying 1 cent. So it's going to have a lot more tax. And what that means is the Canadian government, super happy, it gets to collect more money, but the US government isn't getting treated fairly. It doesn't get to collect a lot of money. And the flip side is true. If the Canadian company paid $1 billion to the US parent company for that same stuff, well, your US company has a lot of revenue, lots of tax money for the US government, they're really happy, but your Canadian company is running an indefinite loss, which means the Canadian government never gets a penny. So transfer pricing means you got to treat these intercompany arrangements as if they were between third parties, acting out what we call in law at arm's length. So what does that mean? There's a few things to consider. We help you through that process. Not a big deal. We've done this a million times. So they're two separate companies, but the good news is it's not that hard, and we can help you with that process. There was a comment in the chat about the costs. So on average, the cost to incorporate in all the pre-incorporation work that we do ranges between about $2,500 and $3,000, including government disbursements. So there are a number of government fees we have to pay, and that includes the simple fees to incorporate the company. What we do for our clients in the onboarding process, we'll give you a full fee guide of estimates or really just quotes that we'll stick to as a fixed fee. And we don't go beyond that without letting you know. we've gotten a lot of clients lately. It's been great, but I feel bad for the clients where they've been leaving other firms because they've been getting these crazy bills out of nowhere, and they're not happy with that. And our view is, look, we've done this a lot. We should be able to provide this to you at a fixed cost. So if we're onboarding you, the first thing we do is we send you a fee guide, and we don't do any work unless you've signed off on it. That's really important to us. There are some differences in US and Canadian law, as we talked about. And so we often help with a whole host of other things. If you're simply setting up an R&D shop in Canada and you're not marketing to the public from Canada, there's a good chance we don't have to do too much. But if you are targeting Canadian customers, often we help companies with things like privacy policies, terms of service, other agreements, things like that. Because sometimes people think, oh, well, I've been using this agreement. It's going to be the same in Canada. Or they say, I've already been using this agreement and we have Canadian customers, so we'll just keep it as is. But the reality is a lot of the laws are different. And so often we do a quick little, second set of eyes, quick little tweaks, just to make sure you've got your bases covered. The last thing you want is this gap in liability that was perfectly covered when you were dealing with someone in the US, but it's actually wide open in Canada simply because the legal concepts are a little bit different. So we never want that to happen. Okay, we're moving through, and I see some comments, and not to worry, we're getting there on the remote dev focus. So, and one of the reasons we're talking about this is, and I hope people can see, can people see my slides have moved? Hopefully we can. If not, there we go. Hopefully that's working now. One of the things to think about is on the employment side. So you're going to hire a remote dev in Canada. That's fantastic. We support that. And as I mentioned before, the value proposition is great. What you don't want to do, though, is run into some legal issues with an employee or a contractor. And I cannot stress this enough for our friends over in the US who are listening. The employment rules in Canada and the US are completely different. And in some cases, they're the exact opposite. It doesn't mean you have a problem in Canada. It just means you need to put the right thing in place. And again, we can help you with that on a really cost-effective basis. Let me just quickly explain it. In the US, there's a concept called at-will employment that exists in pretty much every single US state. That's not true in all of them, but most of them. What that means is you can fire an employee whenever you want and pay them pretty much nothing. The US, not exactly the strongest laws in favor of employees. Of course, in Canada, you don't have to pay healthcare costs, and that is really helpful. But in the US, you often don't see employment agreements. And the reason for that is you can fire them without any cost. Why put this in place? It is the opposite in Canada. Absent an employment agreement, you are stuck in what's called the common law. And the common law is super pro-employee. If you don't have an employment agreement, you could be looking at paying 1 month's salary per year they've worked for you. You could be looking at all sorts of other costs. And it is pretty much impossible to fire someone in Canada for cause. It is such a high bar in Canada because the rules protect employees, which makes sense in some contexts and makes a little bit less sense in other contexts. All that to say, our number one piece of advice when we deal with Americans or people coming from other jurisdictions, make sure you get an employment agreement or an independent contractor agreement in place before they start. If you get it in 3 days later, the courts will say, not valid, it didn't count, you didn't give proper consideration, you didn't give proper value. So there's two main reasons to do that. Number one, you want to contract out of the common law, and you can do that with an employment agreement. What it really does is it says, look, we will give you the bare minimum required by the statute, which in Ontario, for example, is called the Employment Standards Act. So an employment agreement can say, we're going to give you that, and we're not promising you any more. That doesn't mean the company can't be nice. A lot of our clients say, look, we're putting this language in, but we're nice to our employees, and if they go, in good terms, we'll make sure we go above and beyond. But what we don't want companies to be in a position of is they have an employee that's not doing a good job, they're causing problems, and they say, I want to fire them. And they think, no, I can just fire them with no cost. It doesn't work that way in Canada unless you have an employment agreement in place, and then you're looking at, 1 week per year. So you can go from 1 month per year, if not more, to 1 week per year, and you have certainty with an employment agreement. The other reason to do this is intellectual property. So if we're talking about devs, we're talking about people building intellectual property, right? We're talking software. And a lot of people don't realize software can be patented, firstly, but more importantly, software is the bread and butter of a tech company. I cannot tell you how many M&A deals or investment deals I've done where the biggest issue, the biggest stumbling block ends up being intellectual property. Because when the company started out, they didn't have the proper agreements in place. So they were hiring people left, right, and center, different countries, co-ops, you name it. And a bunch of them were hired as contractors because they had people in different jurisdictions and they didn't want them to be employees. And as a result, you could have a theoretical scenario where the intellectual property, the software that this company is selling, your bread and butter, is actually legally not owned by your company. And we have seen, it's rare, but it happens, lawsuits where that press release comes out saying, hey, we've just done a big round, we've just raised 30 million, or hey, we're selling the company for 300 million, and somebody sues the next day. They say, wait a second, I legally actually own that software. You are profiting off of me, and I am suing you for millions and millions of dollars. It does happen. I'm not going to pretend this happens every day, but the intellectual property side is huge. And what people don't realize, and I'm going to pass things over to Ilya in a second, what people don't realize is by default, if you're calling someone an independent contractor, the contractor owns the intellectual property they create in Canada. So unless you have a proper agreement in place, they own it, not the company. So you think, hey, they're doing development for me. They are, but if there's a problem down the road and they get greedy, you could find yourself in trouble. With an employee, it's generally the opposite, but not always. But really all I'm trying to say is these are the kind of things we help with. We spend $500 up front, we can solve a $3 million problem down the road. And on that note, I'm going to pass things over to Ilya, and he's going to take it away. I'm happy to answer any additional questions people have after.
Yeah, there's a lot of questions rolling in on the Q&A and so on, and a lot of stuff that we can share examples. I think Ilya has a lot of companies he works with. Aaron has a lot of companies he works with that they can share examples on. And I can share personal example because Boast has a US company, has a Canadian company, and so I can share our personal expertise there or experience there.
Perfect.
Thanks, Lloyd. Thanks, Aaron. Hi, everyone. Huge pleasure to be here with you guys. Also see some familiar faces in the virtual audience. So Troy, nice to see you, and I think a few other people here. Just want to firstly, before I get into my slides, if you guys have any specific questions about hiring remote tech talent or hiring tech talent, could you just please share that in the chat? So I'm Ilya. Hi, everyone. I'm Ilya. I'm the co-founder and CEO at a company called VanHack. I just found out how to do this virtual backgrounds today, so thanks, Lloyd, for that. A lot easier than I thought it was. Anyways, we are Canada's largest international tech recruiting platform. We've helped bring almost 1,000 developers from all over the world to Canada, also to Europe, and to help companies build more diverse and more experienced senior tech teams. Some big success cases we've had are companies like Skip the Dishes, where we help them hire over 100 people, Vendasta, 20, 25 people. We also work with large companies like Deloitte, Accenture, Capgemini, but mostly we like to work with startups and helping them fill that talent gap. After COVID happened, everyone started asking us about remote hiring, because a lot of times what happens is when you hire from abroad, you hire internationally, you hire someone without ever meeting them in person, right? So you hire them remotely. Sometimes what we've been seeing before was people doing a remote trial, a remote start period, but now that's become the norm. So companies are hiring a developer from, let's say, Venezuela, and that person is working there remotely until they're able to relocate. Aaron quickly mentioned this, and I can go more into detail if people have questions about it, but it really is so much easier to bring developers from anywhere in the world to Canada within 2 months. And I can talk more about those details of exactly how that works. But basically, if you have a Canadian entity, you can qualify for this process. There's no lottery system. It's really much easier. It's pretty much the exact opposite of the H-1B process. So yeah, that's something we can talk more about. But today I want to talk really about hiring remote developers, how to go through that process, why do it, and work on things like payments, contracts, and then also talk about some events that we have coming up soon. So very quickly, I already kind of talked about this, but VanHack we are the largest international tech recruiting company in the country. We have done more global talent screening processes than any other company combined. Number two is Amazon. It's all public data. And we really have been helping companies hire remotely and relocate developers since 2015 when we started. And so, yeah, we do this for ourselves. Our CTO and all of our dev team was hired through VanHack. And yeah, we've been helping companies through this for quite a while. So let's get into, here we go. So what are the advantages? Like, why even hire remotely, right? Like a lot of companies, I think even maybe not so much now, but pre-COVID for sure, they were really skeptical and worried, remote work, does that actually work? Are the developers as good? We'll talk about some of the perceived disadvantages soon, but really the biggest advantage is that you have a global talent pool. You literally can hire anyone in the world, no matter where they are, and that really increases your likelihood of finding motivated candidates. We found something at VanHack that I think developers want more than a higher salary. It's a higher quality of life, because if you're a developer living in, bring up Venezuela or other countries around the world, you maybe have a great job and are making good money there, but what you're worried about is not necessarily getting more money, but it's not being stuck in traffic, things like safety, healthcare systems, etc. And so coming to a country like Canada or Germany, which is another country we're a lot in, Ireland, etc., you have that extra motivation. Another good thing about remote hiring, and if you keep the talent remote, is you can have a follow the sun model. So you can always have people working and coding 24/7, always building, improving your product. Diversity, I think, is probably now becoming the biggest advantage. As we're all seeing what's going on right now in the US, and just generally, the proof, the scientific proof, there's many studies from McKinsey, et cetera, talking about how diverse teams really are much better performing, and especially in the software world, when you're building that product for as many people, especially in consumer software, or even B2B software. You're trying to build something that'll scale and have customers across the world and different genders, different backgrounds, mentalities, ethnicities. So you want something, or you want a team that can see all the different perspectives and be able to bring those ideas to the forefront and say, hey, you know what? Maybe this way that we wrote this word that we're using here in Canada or the US is not going to be perceived the same way in another country. It's a silly example, but the big things like that really make a big difference. Of course, cost is a huge advantage. We talk especially about U.S. salaries, and Lloyd was mentioning about the Bay Area up the top here. I think somewhere I saw that Netflix is paying like $300,000, Google, $300,000 US for a developer. That's just crazy. I think the median salary is something like 150, but still you can get a developer in Canada for, let's say, 100K Canadian, which is around 70K US. Maybe 75, depending on where the exchange rate is today. And then if you go remote, you can go even lower than that. We've seen hires as low as, let's say, 50K US for a senior developer, 10 years experience. So if you're really thinking about stretching your dollar, especially these days when things are a little bit slower, and you want to save as much budget as possible, remote hiring is definitely a great option. And what we're seeing now is like, you might as well hire remote, because hiring someone in Canada is the same, because that person working remotely now as well, right? Or at least they were for the last couple of months. I'm not sure. Some companies are going back to the office. Of course, the good thing about having them in Canada is you can claim shred in IRAP. So what we're seeing is a lot of people have that remote hiring process, and then they bring them in after 2 or 3 months because they want people, like the developers, to live here in Canada. And that's actually what we do at VanHack. Is what we have the combination of remote and relocation. So we have our developers working remotely to start. We prove that they're good, and then they prove to them to us that they're good, and then we go through the visa sponsorship process, and then they keep working remotely. They're just working remotely in Canada. So what are the characteristics that you kind of want to look for in remote workers, and things that you really want to make sure? Caldwell, I see your question. Thank you. Assuming your devs remain in the country of origin, do you use a POE or employer record? Right now, what we do is we have them set up their own entities. So we found that it's just cheaper to have them set up their own businesses and have them working as a micro entrepreneur or a company in that country, and instead of paying a third party to go. Usually it's pretty expensive, like 10, 15, 20% of salary just for the paperwork. They can open up their own entity, and it's cheaper, and it's better for them too from a tax perspective, because if they're working as a business, they don't pay as much tax. So it's I think a win-win for both sides. But it's definitely a very interesting kind of world right now, and we're seeing companies like Remote.com and Deal both raised like over $10 million in the last month on the premise of helping companies with all this paperwork. So Caldwell, thank you for your question. If anyone else has questions, let us know, and I'll try and get through this as quick as possible while still adding value. But anyway, let's get back to
we can take the questions at the end. I think the PEO concept, professional employer organization, is very, very common in the US, like TriNet, like JustWorks, TriNet and JustWorks being the big ones, and then ADP has a full solution. Essentially, what they're saying is they manage all the paperwork, the payroll, and the benefits. I think I personally would deter you from using a PEO if you're in Canada. And I'll share why towards the end, because there's a lot of benefits. And what I will touch on specifically is if you're doing a product development in Canada, you can get 64% of that product development cost as a cashback. And there are some kinks around that. I mean, you could very well use a PEO, but it's a new concept in Canada. So I'll touch on that later.
Thanks, Lloyd. Okay, cool. Let's do questions at the end. I do agree that it is best practice, or it's in your advantage to have that developer relocate to Canada for the retention aspect, because the person, when they move to Canada, they'll be on a 2-year work permit, so they'll be tied, a kind of closed work permit, so they'll be tied to you, which is good. And also, we found at VanHack, at least with the hires that we've helped make, is, you're changing someone's life, and therefore they're really grateful and thankful. We have someone here from Unbounce on the line, and Aaron from Unbounce, and they hired 2 developers from us, one from Belarus and one from Colombia. And so those people, after talking to them, they moved here to Vancouver. They're super happy to have, be living here, making a great salary, working for an awesome company like Unbounce. Fun fact, VanHack was actually started as an Unbounce page, so forever grateful to that company. And they're, you have the best of both worlds, because that person now is in Canada, they're in your office, or you can work remotely, having a hybrid team, some days working remotely, some days come to the office, best of both. And also at the same time, getting that 64% back. And VanHack actually is, we have 5 developers working on our team, and that we're getting a quite substantial amount of money back this year from Shred for the first time. And I was telling Lloyd before the webinar how surprised I was to be getting a check from the government for such a large amount of money. Really helpful, especially these days with the recession. Anyways, so with remote, you really want to look at people who are defaulting to action, like really action-oriented, people who are proactive, and not necessarily just waiting to be told what to do, because you can't always be there next to them, giving them specific instructions. Also, people who are really good at communicating, non-verbally, writing, that's really important. And able to manage their own time and trustworthy. Of course, this is kind of like, you want people like this all the time, but it's extra important to have these kind of people in remote settings. Some disadvantages, I chatted about this earlier. People have this misconception, and I think unconscious or even conscious bias, right? Like where, hey, a developer from Nigeria or a developer from Venezuela or a developer from Pakistan probably isn't as good. Maybe say something a little bit controversial here, but a lot of times I hear people say, developers from X country, oh, they're terrible, right? Because like, I'm going to let people fill in the blank with whatever country that they probably have had this conversation, like, oh, they're, for whatever reason, developer from X country isn't so good. And I really hate the stereotypes, and it shows, I think, a lot for people who, got them. Yeah, exactly. It's terrible, right? Like, I think it's really, frankly, racist almost comments, and I think people need to get over that. There's different types of quality of people, just like there's great developers in the US and great developers in Canada. There's also terrible developers in the US and terrible developers in Canada. So just, something I think we're now, as a world, we can be a little bit more open-minded and say that, hey, there's great talent everywhere, and let's give people a shot, and you'll be pleasantly surprised. And I think, so also trust is a huge disadvantage. People see, like, can I really trust this person I've never met in real life? What I'll say to that is, I'm probably meeting more people in especially these days, I'm meeting more people virtually than I am in person. Like Aaron and I just met right now on this webinar. He seems like a trustworthy guy. He's a lawyer, but how are you going to know, right? And I think it's much more common these days to have that trust built virtually rather than in person. And as we become, all of us here are knowledge workers, right? Like you just meet more people virtually. So you should trust those people. And as time goes on, I think there's more signals that they'll be built, and people will be more open and comfortable. I think it's similar kind of how online dating back in, I don't know when exactly, 2005, 2010, when that was starting to take off, people were really freaked out about online dating. Like, how are you going to meet your husband and wife virtually? Well, I think now it's like half of marriages are started online or something like that. And that's totally normal in our society. So I think half of, I'm not sure how many people are getting hired these days. Probably everyone's getting hired these days remotely. So we're going to go over that barrier as a culture, as a economy. Society. So cultural differences, I'll talk about that as well a little bit later. And then some disadvantages people are saying is like software or even hardware. For example, we had a problem yesterday. I spent like an hour solving a problem where we had a developer in South America who doesn't have access to a MacBook, but their employer in Canada needs them to have a MacBook. So what's the solution there? Is it the developer who needs to buy a MacBook, but he's working as a contractor? How does that look like? It could be a little bit tricky. The solution, they're going to send him a MacBook, but it can cause some problems with not having the right software installed and not the right tools in place. We'll talk about paying remote workers soon in the next slides. So let's just keep going. So how do you actually measure quality of work? And Gautam, thank you. I just want to say thanks for that. Your comment was really nice. Okay, so how do you ensure quality of work, right? That's really a big thing. And how do you know that a person is actually doing things that they say they're going to do, etc. A big thing that we found is having a buddy system in the first couple months, first 3 months actually, for anyone who joins our team, and having that person check in. This is not your manager. This is not HR. It's just a third party, kind of someone either on your team or not, who can check in and make sure everything's going well. Also, having very clear documentation. We use Jira and on Confluence. We're an Atlassian shop, I guess. Highly recommend that. Of course, Notion. Everyone's seen this, the 50 million round that they raised, and they're really growing as a documentation software tool. Whatever you guys prefer, just have something. And it's something that, for me personally, took a long time to get into. And I think once we got into it, it's really helpful. And now I always tell everyone, hey, is that if it's not in Confluence, it doesn't exist, kind of thing. And there's also a cool Slack to Confluence integration. And I'm sure Notion and other tools have that, where anytime you edit something, there's automatically a pop-up in Slack. And therefore, you can kind of keep everyone on the same page. Make sure people are comfortable and open. Not having a silly question, or like making sure people are open, asking kind of silly questions or any question that they have. Tell them it's okay to fail. Definitely try not to micromanage. It's something I definitely need to improve on. But as you're hiring people and having them work on your team, making sure you're giving them room to grow and improve, and then check in with them, making sure that they're doing all right. Trust. How do you build trust in a remote team? I think it's even harder, in a remote team than an in-person team. A lot of things, you guys can read the slides here. One thing that I'll quickly talk about is working hours. That's something that's recently come up as a challenge in our company, is like, how do you trust that people are actually working the hours they're going to work? You can't see them coming into the office in the morning and leaving at night. So how do you make sure that they're actually online? People can be on their phone at the beach, but be like on Slack and commenting a few things, but actually seem like they're working, but they're not. So how do you actually do that and trust that? I think it's something that it's hard to know, but I think that at the end it really is. It's about quality of work, and for developers especially, you see people code, right? You see how their commits and how they're working. So it's, I think, a little bit easier that way, and really focusing on how code quality. Doing code reviews and then making sure that's looking good, rather than how many hours they actually spend coding. One cool thing that we've done at VanHack is we created a kind of morning ritual of saying good morning. So just a screenshot I took a couple weeks ago of everyone on our team saying good morning. the time zones. As you can see, we get people from different parts of the world. So this is the Pacific time zone. But one cool thing about having a remote distributed team is you have people who are, all across the world, and we have more working hours. We have a joke internally that VanHack never sleeps. We're a team of 30 people, but we're always kind of working and getting things done. It's really nice to see. Cultural differences. This is something that I think can be kind of fun and also challenging. We just had a happy hour today that where someone from our team from Pakistan, he's a Canadian living in Canada, but he's originally from Pakistan, talked about his culture and food and things like that, having a happy hour, sharing culture differences in the country, within the company. One funny thing is in holidays. We have a lot of team members on our team from Brazil, so they have Carnival in February or March, and it's like everyone gets a week off, and it's kind of some people on the team kind of sometimes feel, hey, like is this fair or not? I heard in India there's like 21 holidays. We have a funny situation on the webinar now with the TRCMO, where he's actually a Canadian employee, but he was kind of stuck in India because of COVID. So do we give him the holidays from Canada, from India? Which holidays do people get? It's kind of an interesting situation that you have to keep an eye out for. The remote tools that we use, very quickly, Slack and Zoom, pretty much the go-to. Of course, Google Docs, Hangouts every once in a while as well. We use Asana a lot internally. We don't really use Trello that much, but Asana I would say more now. Jira for the dev team. Really cool, good tool that I highly recommend for everybody. Either 15.5 or 7 Geese. It's one of these performance management tools where every week, every Friday, every person on the team gets a question: how was your week on a scale of 1 to 5? And they answer that, and then you can get feedback. This is really good for, especially, sometimes people don't want to share problems, but if they put like a 2 or 3, the person's not having the best week, so you want to check in with them. And I mentioned Confluence already. Cool. Interviewing. This is a really big challenge, of course, interviewing remotely. So what are you going to do, with things like Wi-Fi, people not having the best conference setup, not people not being able to be on the same time zone, sometimes missing calls. So you always really want to be flexible with that, especially if you're interviewing someone in a time zone that's hard for you. Maybe you have to wake up a little bit earlier, etc. There's always a solution. We find that international candidates, especially when coming back to that highly motivated and grateful aspect, they'll be open and willing to interview at 1, 2 a.m. their time. What American or Canadian engineer will say, you know what, I'm happy to do a job interview at 1 in the morning. It doesn't happen, but when you have international folks, there's a little bit of more flexibility that they come with as well. And of course, making sure that you send the video link so the person can join and be totally understanding if, for some reason their Wi-Fi is not working, etc. I would say, especially these days, giving people the benefit of the doubt and working with them rather than, I've seen a lot of interviews where the person said, the Wi-Fi is awful, the person's rejected, not even giving them a second chance. It's not really fair in my opinion, but every company has their own processes, just something to keep an open mind about. Quickly, payment. And we'll talk about contracts and POEs. One tools that we use TransferWise a lot, Payoneer as well. PayPal is a little bit more expensive, so I think TransferWise is really good. Making sure you're aware of tax implications. Aaron and I think Lloyd can talk better about that. So really just, these are a few tools that we use. And what we do is we hire people, as I mentioned, as micro entrepreneurs. They have their own kind of legal entities, and we pay them as service providers that way. Cool. So we're definitely not the experts in remote work. There's a lot more companies that are great at this. Zapier, GitLab have amazing handbooks and remote work guides. A really good podcast is distributed by Matt Mullenweg, who's the CEO of Automatic, which is a company that built WordPress. Buffer as well. There's so many of these, and I think every company now is popping up something like this. Top Talent, one of our competitors, has some really good content about that as well. So yeah, just check those out. Again, the distributed podcast for all you podcast listeners out there is a pretty good one. A little bit about us. I'll just kind of quickly end on this. We've been finding that we're able to help companies hire very quickly with our virtual hiring fairs that we're doing. We're having one coming up in June. Well, now it's June 12th. Or we can do a personalized hiring event for you where you can post your job or interview from a pre-selected group of over 200 senior engineers. So if you're curious about that, just check out vanhack.com. There's a get started button, fill that out, or email me. I'll put my email here. And that's it. Yeah, with that, happy to answer questions and help everyone on their journeys. Thanks so much.
Awesome. That was fantastic. And I'm not sure what happened to Aaron. He's probably still there. I'm going to enable my video so you can see me as well. But thanks for that. That was great. I want to just spend 2 or 3 minutes telling you more about how we've leveraged it. Like I said at the beginning, I had previously built a product team in the Bay Area, which was very expensive. We had raised $6 million. We had funding from Salesforce, from Bessemer, and then we ended up shutting down. And I feel like if I had that money, I could probably in Canada build get to 40, 50 million ARR, right? And anyway, so Boast.AI, what we do is we automate R&D tax incentives. So between US and Canada, every year, over $10 billion is given to 120,000 plus companies. In Canada, if you're doing R&D, you can get about 64% of that R&D spend as a cashback. In the US, it's about 10 to 20%, depending on the state. In the US, once you hit 5 million in revenue or you have 5 years of revenue, it's no longer cash back, it's a tax credit. In Canada, your revenue doesn't matter. You can have lots of revenue. If you're a Canadian controlled private corporation, you can get 64% of your R&D spend as a cash back, which makes it a huge incentive. Now you layer on other programs like IRAP, which is another government funding program. And what that does is that gives you money ahead of time. It's a grant program that funds 50 to 80% of your R&D projects. So what happens with R&D tax, or SR&ED as the program is called, Scientific Research and Experimental Development, after you finish your tax year, you claim R&D tax credits on the spend for that year and with your taxes, and you get that money as a cashback. With IRAP, you apply for it before you start on a project and they approve you and you get 50 to 80%. Now you factor that IRAP money you're gonna get and the R&D tax money, and then you layer on cost savings, you layer on long-term employee retention, you layer on free healthcare, you layer on visa. What I find is that for each developer that I used to hire in the Bay Area, it ends up one being 3 to 3.5 devs in Canada. And then the second thing is just the communication, the flow has been easier. People stick around, and the value of people sticking around is worth its weight in gold, right? I can't say this enough, because you have a flow, and then the flow breaks every time you lose somebody because they got offered more equity or more salary. Now, of course, in the times of COVID, you're not going to run into that issue. But if you're thinking for the long term, eventually it's going to play out. So my company, Boast.AI, what we do is we automate this process. So we connect with your GitHub, your Jira, whatever project tracking tools. We'll connect with your financial tools, and then we have smart engineers and CPAs on the back end that prepare and manage your entire R&D tax claim. So you get the money, and we charge you an invoice or take a percentage of what you get when you get back. So we handle your entire R&D tax claim process, from filing or from identifying what work qualifies, to preparing the reports, to defending it with the government, to making sure you get the money. And we handle that end to end. But through Traction, through Boast.AI, we co-founded Traction Conf, and to build a community of founders that share advice and learnings with each other. And so I thought it would be worthwhile talking about this topic, because all my Bay Area buddies are asking me, how do I set up in Canada? And this used to not happen a lot, but almost every week now we're getting inquiries from either customers or prospects or my neighbors or people I know, friends. Say, how do I set up in Canada? I need to improve the unit economics, because people are thinking, if I could work anywhere and the location wasn't a barrier, then where would I set up? And you'd look at US cities, you'd look at Austin. Austin is great. You look at Denver and so on. There's some great cities here, but I think when you look at Canada, the government incentive, I can tell you exactly what the Texas R&D tax credit is in comparison to like the Ontario tax credit. Getting 64% back on your R&D spend, plus getting access to all these government grants, plus having $1 stretch 1.35, and the long-term employee retention, I think it's worth its weight in gold, right? So like the culture in Canada is very socialist, and people care about other things, and those other things are they care about having a great life, and they care about more social things. And if you appeal to those things as a company and a culture, your team will never leave you. And that's what we've done. Some of the things we do is like annual offsites. We take the company every year to an exotic place. Last year or this year, we took everyone to Cabo for a week. Last year, we went to Costa Rica. Before that, we went to Hawaii. Those are little things that, I mean, it's not like we're taking the money, the savings, and lacing our pockets with it. We're spending it, right? All the profits from Traction, we donated into the community through Launch Academy, which is our partner in a nonprofit. So things like that, when you do more socialistic things in a country like Canada, you will get tenfold out of it. Like, you build the community, support the community, give back to the community, and that'll help your company grow. So that's been a big learning for us. And honestly, we've not raised any money. We will cross more than 10 million in revenue without any outside funding, and that's the biggest benefit I've seen. And I probably could never do that in a million years being in the Bay Area. Is there a mandatory percentage of one's workforce that must be in Canada to qualify for these R&D tax incentives? It's not a mandatory percentage of your workforce. What they want to see is that you have a Canadian-controlled entity that Aaron talked about. And maybe Aaron, you can touch a little bit more on how you guys set up the CCPC, because the steps, right? So I go through this almost like on a weekly basis when a friend asks me, and or a client or a prospect asks me. The first step is figure out if you can do that CCPC setup. Go talk to Aaron. Then the next step is figure out if you can hire and find the best talent, and go talk to Ilya. Once you have that, then you do the payroll setup, and you use something like Humi.ca. So there's a whole bunch of steps that we can send as a playbook after. But Aaron, take on that CCPC question, because that's the big one.
Sure. Okay. So first thing to understand with Shred, you gotta be a Canadian company. So let's pretend, for example, you're a US company right now. You're based in the Bay Area. You are a US company. You're probably either incorporated in Delaware or in California or whatever. So right now you don't qualify, but that's okay. You got to set up a Canadian company. Okay, so once you have a Canadian company set up, you're now Shred eligible. Okay, so you're able to get back at a minimum 15% of your eligible spend. Lloyd and his team are amazing at helping people figure out what they can get back and helping maximize that. Because there is an increased number of audits these days. The government knows that they're giving away a lot of money, and they want to make sure it's getting put to good use. So people like Boast.AI and others are doing a great job to help people, because it can be a really painful process. These guys make it so simple. So they're there for that. So as I mentioned, that's 15%. That's not quite as good. The real value you want is this 35% threshold. And you get there if you are what's called a CCPC, Canadian Controlled Private Corporation. Well, what does that mean? Well, if I own it, I'm a Canadian taxpayer, I'm a Canadian resident and a Canadian citizen. If I create a company and I'm doing all this R&D, I'm going to most likely qualify, right? It's owned all the way up at the top by a Canadian, which is me. If you're a US company, sometimes people just set up a subsidiary. So they say, look, we're going to set up a Canadian subsidiary. It's going to be 100% owned by the US company. Well, up the chain, who owns that? Generally Americans, maybe a venture capital fund, the co-founders, all that. They're not going to be a CCPC. And there's not a problem for that. It just simply means you're only getting back 15%. There are ways to structure so that you can be more likely to be seen as a CCPC. It's a facts and circumstance test, which can get annoying for some founders, because they say, tell me the 3 things I have to do to qualify. And the answer is, it's not quite that simple. But if you want to structure in a way that increases the likelihood you would qualify, what you need is a Canadian resident, not a Canadian citizen, but Canadian tax resident, has to control at least 50% of the company. So what does that mean? Well, voting for the directors, they need to be able to appoint at least half the board. And from an ownership standpoint, they got to have 50% equity. So sometimes we see different ways that people try to, I don't want to use the word game the system, but try to say, look, we're a CCPC, here's steps we've taken. So sometimes that could be, hey, I've got my token Canadian shareholder that's going to have voting rights, but their shares are worthless. The company can redeem them for $1 whenever it wants. Again, you can take the position you're a CCPC, there's audit risk. Similarly, you could say, look, I have some contractual right to do this. and that might work. All that to say is we can help you structure it. There is always some risk, but for a lot of clients, they say, look, we're comfortable with that risk. You know, we're entrepreneurs. We're okay with this. We're doing a lot of R&D. We're comfortable. There are risks there, but certainly we can structure it. But really, there's two main ways we proceed. Number one, we set up a typical subsidiary where it's owned 100% by the US company or the European company or whatever it is. And in that case, you're not a CCPC, but you do have a Canadian company. So you're eligible for a lot of good tax stuff. It's just not quite as good. The second one is when they say, you know what, we really want to be a CCPC. We want to maximize this. And we can say, great, here are the steps we recommend you take to reduce your risk. We can't guarantee it's going to be perfect. We can't guarantee it'll be audit proof. But we can do what you want and structure it in a way that gets you as close as possible to accomplishing your goal.
Awesome. There's a couple more questions. Is developing any software or a web application considered R&D? So that's a good one, right? So when the government says R&D tax credit, it's not white lab coat R&D. Essentially, they're giving you money for experimental development. So in the US, the criteria is you're developing a new product or process or material, like a business component, and you were faced with technological challenges that you couldn't resolve with publicly available information. And believe it or not, it's very similar in Canada. You should be seeking to advance your company's knowledge base, and en route or during that effort, you face technological challenges that you couldn't resolve with publicly available information. So two examples here. On the low end, let's say you're doing an integration. Now everyone will jump up and say integration is not R&D. But let's say you're integrating with a third-party manufacturing system that's using some legacy software, ERP software that's not around. There's no documentation, there's no code, and now you got to write the communication protocol to make the two systems talk at 100%. And that 100% is key, right? In some industries, let's say you're integrating with Walmart's manufacturing line, and if it's not 100%, you're going to cause like millions of dollars in damage per hour for them. On the high end, but so that's where like an integration would be considered R&D, where anytime you're extending or making better or improving things significantly, the answer to which is not in the public domain as a plug and play. The other thing could be you're building AI to parse through, or machine learning algorithms to parse through different types of data, voice, video, text, and provide real-time inferences to the end user, let's say at a bank. There's a lot of R&D there. There's R&D there because you're trying to combine different types of data, and you're not going to get to an end outcome in like half an hour or like weeks of coding. It's going to take a while. So that's how I would look at it. And for me, it's easy because I run the product team here, so I can translate it almost immediately. A lot of the stuff we're building ourselves. So that's why. We'll take a couple more questions. We have 3 more minutes to go here. And then we'll close it out. Have you heard of an accelerator called Capital Factory? I think Capital Factory is a great Austin-based accelerator, and I would encourage all their companies, if they're looking to scale their dev teams, should consider setting up in Canada and talking to Aaron and Ilya to scale their team. There was a question around PEOs that's important that I wanted to touch on. So in the US, it's very common to have a PEO, and what a PEO is, a professional employee organization. And there's companies like TriNet and ADP and JustWorks are very popular in that. What they do is, because they have such a large workforce and so many companies, they go and negotiate large volume benefits. So when you sign up with TriNet, your employees are not employees of your company. Your employees are employees of TriNet. And they issue a payroll to your employees, and the EIN on that T4 or W2 is TriNet's EIN or W2, or JustWorks EIN or W2. Now the US has this figured out for the R&D tax credit, right? The US government, it's been age old, it's known. Now in Canada, let's say you use a PEO and your R&D tax claim gets audited, and they see your W2 in it. They ask for the W2 in an audit, and they see some other payroll, some other EIN, they'll be confused. They'll just ask clarifications. I mean, we've worked with clients, with US clients that use PEO in Canada, and then the government just wants to see the GL, and they want to basically see the GL and your bank statement that actually indeed money was paid to these employees. And if you're able to show that, that's great. But because it's new, it may be a slight confusing, hairy situation. That's all.
From a legal standpoint, sorry to jump in, we generally don't recommend PEOs. We see issues come up frequently with some of these companies. Usually what people want to do is they don't want to have an employee right away, so they're trying to find a workaround, and they use a PEO. And we've just seen we see a bunch of problems come up often between the company and the PEO, because often the employee, who's technically an employee of the PEO, not of you as the company, they think they're employed by you. Everyone's sort of treating it that way. And you can end up in these really awkward situations where they're saying, oh, I wasn't paid these employment benefits, or I wasn't paid this. And often the contracts with these PEOs are really shoddy, and you end up in a position where either the employees come in after you, or it's just generating, the opposite of goodwill, some bad will. And so, it's sometimes a starting point. It's not a recommendation from a legal standpoint and just in practice, but certainly it is an option for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And it's very buttoned up in the US, where it's a non-issue. A few years ago, when the US R&D tax credit got really popular, when they said, hey, you can use the US R&D tax credit to offset your payroll taxes in the US, that's when the PEOs hadn't figured it out. And actually we worked with TriNet, one of the biggest PEOs, to help them figure out the process. I personally worked with their GC to get this process going in place. This was 2016-17. But in Canada, it's not buttoned up. So I would just be careful. There's lots of platforms like Humi.ca, which you can use for payroll and benefits, and they're great. And then I think step one, if you're thinking about Canada, is do the math, right? I gave you the math here, where ignore, let's say you don't get IRAP or any other grant, but if you set up as a CCPC, and you're effectively building tech that will run into technological challenges. If there's complexity in your work, in your R&D, you can get these R&D tax credits back. So factor that into your equation, and maybe you don't put it at 64%. Maybe you say you get 35% back. The 64% essentially is factoring in a lot of things. So if you're a Canadian controlled entity, you get 35% from federal, 10%, almost 10% from the province, and then for each salary dollar you spend, you get to put 55 cents on the dollar as overhead. So that all makes it 64%. So, but you can factor it down just to give you a better estimate and say, you know what, maybe I'll get 50% of the R&D spend as a cashback. Then you add just the dollar incentive of USD 1 to 1.35, and effectively, you know how to scale. And especially in this environment, cost is everything, right? How do you make, as a founder, how do you make your money go farther? How do you stretch your dollar? How do you do more with less? And there's no better way than to do that. And if you can do that in an easy way, you owe it to your company and yourself to explore that.
I need some traction. You need some traction.